Okay, so we are joined in conversation today by the one and only Mark Green. Um, for those that don't know Mark, he heads up bar enablement and pre-sales at Consensus. He's also a co-host on the excellent Two Pre-Sales in a Pod podcast, and just in general a big contributor to the pre-sales community. So, and just to say that from my conversations with Mark in the past, he's always come up with a really fresh perspective and makes me laugh. So it's great to have you here. Thanks, Mark.
It's great to be here, John, and thank you, Isabella, as well. Yes, it's wonderful to be on Hireside Chat, and it's wonderful to be part of this industry that keeps the conversation going.
Too right, too right. So the first question that we like to ask is, what do you love about pre-sales?
Well, I grew up in the technology world, in technology communication, technology I could do, IT, cloud computing, all that jazz. That was easy. But the thing I loved, the thing that got me out of bed every day, was pre-sales and talking to people and helping them and helping them understand technical concepts, both on for people who were really technical, and helping them see value, but also not very technical. They still needed to understand the value that was being brought. So coming up through and being that pre-sales person, I have felt the challenges. Been doing it so long now that it was well, I'm not going to say quite how long because that makes me feel really old. But I mean, I used to go lugging projectors with me around to client sites and hoping that they had a plug in a room, and all of these challenges are changing. And one of the one things that I found is that being in the industry for so long doesn't really matter as much as we'd love it to. But certainly seeing how much change has happened, and therefore how much the speed of change over the last few years, seeing that impact over the longer period, that is the thing that I really think really does help. And the speed of change is wonderful, but quite something to keep up with.
Yeah, yeah, especially post-COVID. No, that's kind of accelerated it all.
Well, true. Yes, we've got people going back to the office, but we've got half the people going back to the office and half the people not. So I know Peter Curran is a good proponent of this hybrid meetings and making sure that you understand that if you've got one person on a remote method and everyone else is in the room, then the presentation goes right back down to that level of the remote, because you have to keep them involved as well. And so it's very difficult. And I think we're all getting used to it and understanding it.
Yeah, for sure. For
And
sure.
I believe it is so good for the companies who are able to adapt to both remote workers and on-site ones. So, Mark, if you are thinking about the pre-sales, could you think about the top qualities of a star performer that would differentiate them from a regular one?
Well, it's interesting. So I would say that Don Carmichael's vision of the three main aspects of a pre-sales person is now being modified to maybe there's four, and I'll explain. So the three are: they have to be good at the product, so the technology part. Can they actually use the software that they're trying to show? The other thing is, are they relevant in the industry at all? Do they have that professional presence? And the third one is, are they able to communicate any of that? So the communication and the personal skills. But I think that there's another layer that is the ability to combine all of these together, using the tools that we have, using the methods, and working in this remote way suddenly is massively important. So it's less these days about being able to stand up in front of a room and work the room. Working the room now is a very virtual space and a very hybrid space. So those three things are really important. And if I was hiring a classic pre-sales person, it would be those things that I would look at. Some are easy to get, some are easier to train, and so it just depends what kind of role you're trying to fill. And so I think the first thing that anyone needs to do before they go out and try to hire a pre-sales person is figure out what their growth plan for that pre-sales person is, and whether the career development in that role is worth getting someone in and training them up. Because if there is a development plan, then that person will come in and they will stay in.
Hmm.
It is so nice that you mention it. Do you think they should mention it directly from the hiring phase? It is an important factor in getting the candidate on board.
Well, yes, and which is why when you see job specs and they say great career opportunities, I think candidates should go in and say, so you say that you've got great career opportunities. This current step is the career opportunity that I'm taking. Are you saying that there's a good progression available after this? Because it's worth understanding that if you're planning on staying there for 3 or 4 years, what shape is that department? What shape is the team? What opportunities are there as an IC to grow? And are you actually able to be measured in order to get there? Or is it just whether or not your boss likes you? Because I would say that if it's the latter, I would push for there being a proper progression plan in place, or at least say, I'm very, very happy to come and join. I do have aspirations. I'm not going to come into the job and then get bored after a year, but I do want to know that I'm working towards something, and I need to know what that is. And any good hiring manager will be able to explain what that is.
That's great. And I think, Mark, you and I spoke about this before. And obviously you come from to my understanding, a background whereby you've had senior positions, but so the impact has been through digital media or through speaking and so on and so forth, more through evangelism than through kind of like having a bigger team, let's say. From that experience and based on what you're saying, what do you think would a great career progression would look like for an individual contributor? Like, how can that be tangible within organizations?
So there's 2 ways that people grow. I'm sure you're already aware, but there's two ways that I believe that people grow, and it's based on, so when you're trying to work out what the growth plan is for individuals in your team, it's what are the company's needs and what are the person's needs.
Yeah.
And it's a balance between the two.
Yeah.
Sure, you can just think about the business needs and say, well, they need to perform this well, they need to do this. But if that's not aligned with the personal growth needs of that person, then you'll get some divergence along the way.
Yeah.
And that's much harder to bring it back in once it's started to split. So what I would say is that my perfect team is a team where all of the people in it are growing and learning towards their own personal missions, and they happen to coincide with what I need from the business. In fact, I would probably more towards individual people's growth than the needs of the business. Now, that's a very, very difficult decision to make as a leader that has to deliver a service to the rest of the organization. You need to deliver that. Yeah. But I do believe in people, and I do believe in growing people, and I think if you give things to people, they will give back in return in the long run. And I'm not a short-term benefit person. I like setting people up for long-term success.
Yeah, which, like, there's that what's the expression, people don't care until they know you care, or something like that. And it's so I think that if you're managing it, if you're an individual and certain things are important to you on an individual level that you want to be getting involved in, and you see that your organization, your management, and so on and so forth doing everything possible to make that possible for you, you kind of respect the intention, and also you understand that there'll be times where you have to kind of get your hands dirty and do the things that are required for the business, but it becomes both sides are giving as opposed to waiting for the other to give before.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. I've had some great bosses over the time, and I owe an immense amount to them. And when I was at Sage, for example, I worked for the most amazing person called Alex Watson. And he's still there. He's probably still hiring. So if you want to go and work for him, go and have a look. But I would say that by making sure that he was there for us in the times when he didn't need to be, it meant that gave him the permission and the ability to, when he needed to, come and say, look, we got this thing to do.
Yeah.
It's not very
Someone's
nice.
got to do it.
Yeah, it's a tough. Let's not misunderstand. It's going to be tough, and it's not necessarily in the way that we do it, and it's not necessarily going to have the impact I think the people who've requested it believe it will. But this time we're going to do it because we're here and no one else can. So let's get on with it. And you know what? We did. And we did it with pride. And in fact, I think we did it so well that in the end it did have a massive impact, which is great. And I think that's a lesson that I learned about helping people come back and do some heavy lifting. You've got to put the heavy lifting in and work on their behalf first.
Yeah.
Having been in senior roles at a lot of organizations, what have you seen that work well with hiring, and where do you think there is now room for improvement?
Yes. I think that the world of hiring is changing because, certainly from my perspective, working at Consensus, we see what is landing on people's CVs is more about the impact that they have. And this comes on to something that we could dive into later if you want, but it really comes down to when a hiring manager had a problem in the past, they would see it in terms of the number of headcount they would need in order to solve that problem. And sure, not completely. Like you'd know who in your team you could stretch and who you couldn't stretch, but getting new people in was very much involved, often about the AE to SE ratio. These days, I think it's switching more to understanding the impact that individual can bring using all sorts of tools. Like I said, I'm here at Consensus, and we find that when people understand the impact that they can have in both the time they are able to give to the business need, but also the number of activities that they can offer, suddenly you're hiring one person, and if you hire the right person, then they're able to have a lot more impact. So these digitally enabled pre-sales people popping up more all over the place, and that's a pleasure for me. I'm currently doing the same actually. I'm trying to put together a job spec for a very strange new style of pre-sales person where instead of, I know it's a bit of a challenge, and it's like a combination of many existing things, but you could call it maybe an inside pre-sales, you could call it a demo engineer, you could call it a buyer enablement rep. These are people who are completely focused on being surprisingly helpful for buyers, but in a totally scaled way. So we're now talking about ratios of 1 to 50, 1 to 300 SE to AE reps.
Wow.
But for companies who think, oh well, no, that's crazy, we can't have that, that's because the ratio calculation stops being very effective as a thing to work on. It's far easier to work out than what that person has provided. So suddenly, if they create a absolutely perfect, and I don't mean overproduced, I mean perfectly authentic, oh, you wanted to see a bit about that? Sure. You know what? Why don't I share my screen and I'll show you right now? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
If they can get that in the hands of whomever needs to interact with buyers, their impact is massive. And so it's quite important to make sure that you create that authentic content. But once you have, the sky's the limit for how you apply it across an entire business. And so, yeah, that's the job spec I'm writing at the moment.
Wow. So what would a day in the life be like of this individual?
So it would be two things. Of course, there's content to create, but then you must always be measuring. So measuring the impact of that content, seeing where you can change it, seeing the engagement, seeing who's watching what. Like, so look at the amalgamated heat map and see who keeps skipping that bit.
Okay,
Now,
and with this, sorry to butt in, but just so with this, you're referring to using consensus as a platform, and so as a principal tool, or using a similar
true.
technology.
So I mean, I
I
guess very close to my heart. Yes, using consensus, but using any other tool as well.
Yeah.
Using demo automation tools or any. So the job would entail using the tools, but then measuring the effectiveness of the tools.
Right.
Because I don't want someone.
But the tools are the core of what you're doing in terms of like measurements and creating things and so on.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. Yes. Yes. So their day-to-day would be recording demos, but also working with the sales teams, working with marketing, working with customer success to make sure that the demos are being used, that the customers are liking them, talking to customers, finding out what was the buying journey like when you came and bought from us.
It sounds super interesting, this new role. And have you ever heard about someone like that? Like, where did this idea came from?
Well, no, this is the problem. It feels a little bit new. And it's an honor, actually, to be at a company where, firstly, you're given the freedom to understand the problem well enough to try to fix that, rather than just apply traditional methods. Many people have already been applying traditional methods, and then to have to do some sort of hybrid approach. There are companies out there that are doing similar things. I know that there are very, very large companies which have whole departments purely based on digital content, not for marketing, but there's always been content marketing parts of businesses, but really looking at what content and what automation and how you can help buyers all the way through the buying journey. But they don't talk to customers, they talk to them through their content.
And this would be this type of role would be valid within large enterprise organizations. So say you've got a classic business process oriented SaaS company that sells into, FTSE 100 organizations or FTSE 250 organizations. So if you head up, let's say, for example, you're a head of one of those pre-sales organizations in EMEA, and you're thinking about changing your structure, and I assume it would coincide with changes in technology and approach and that sort of thing. How would this person fit into the existing structure of the organization? So would there still be existing pre-sales professionals? What part of those pre-sales professional jobs would be taken, or is it purely on the digital side, and therefore it's just an expansion of the realm of pre-sales activities? Like, how would it fit into the org structure, and how would it impact the role of people in pre-sales?
That's a really good question. And so firstly, it would always improve the life of pre-sales. I have spent so long in pre-sales, I feel like I can't do anything now that's not just going to help them, because that's in my blood. However, the role would definitely sit underneath the revenue team, and we see a lot of companies aligning, instead of sales and customer success and support going up through into different places. We see a lot now just hanging underneath one revenue organization, which is really, really important, because when I used to work at Sage and I brought consensus into Sage, I really needed help in order to understand what it was going to do. And what I didn't realize was, when we were recording all of this content, this was also going to help people after the sale. So the project really started once we'd signed to buy the software and then put the project in place. And so then taking that and then thinking, how can I help customers through that? Once we've been really helpful through that buying process, pre-sales usually at that point stops, because they're new business, or they are not often part of that post-sale activity. But this role would not see any difference between someone wanting to expand what they've already got, or make sure that they really understood, so you help a reduction in churn, than a new customer. The benefits are still the same. You still have a project, and maybe phase 2 is still just as important as someone who's net new.
Okay.
So there would be basically no barrier in who could use their content.
So would that make them almost like a resource for pre-sales orgs and also the revenue org in general, but pre-sales would then carry on with their position as normal, but we're able to leverage all of this content and so on?
Well, I'm not sure. And what's really nice is that many of these questions are as yet unanswered.
Right.
And I can sit here and imagine that I've got all of the answers. I mean, of course, they have all the answers, but actually, we're all learning, and that's what's fascinating about this space.
Yeah,
I think it can depend so much on the shape of existing companies.
Yeah,
because they're set up in so many different ways. What's right for me might not be right for somebody else. But I do think that the concept of, I don't know why as soon as we sign on the dotted line, do all of the wonderful, friendly, helpful pre-sales people just vanish? That seems really odd to me. And the reason, of course, historically, is because we can't afford them. We can't afford to have them on throughout the whole life cycle of the customer. But that's not a problem anymore, because if these people are using recorded content, you'll still have pre-sales people for the start, but this content should be applicable across the way.
Fascinating.
For Mark, thank you so much for everything. I have only one more question. If you could think about the hiring process in general for the pre-sales, and you could reinvent it, do you think there are some specific magical ingredients that you can add?
Yes, and I think about this all the time. I look at the wonderful CVs that are full of things like, I engage with my customers, I'm, provide them real impact, I'm great at doing discovery, great at doing research, great at tying their value drivers with our the benefits that we can bring. And then when they try to get a job, they don't do any of that. They just provide one piece of paper and hope that you can get all you need out of that.
Yeah.
And I really find it very difficult that if you are saying that you are an expert in not just selling something, but in being able to communicate value in the way that the person you're talking to wants to hear it, if they're not sending me a video when they're trying to get a job at a video demo automation company, they are already at the bottom of the pile. So I think people really could do with treating their hiring manager like a customer, doing all the discovery. I know that you tell them this all the time, but it still amazes me how people don't come with a little proposal. They're an expensive thing. They're going to cost more than £100,000 or dollars or whatever. Come to me with more than just a piece of paper.
100%. And it's a bit like you can have two, it's a bit of a weird analogy, you can have two chefs and they both cook the same things, and on their CVs it would be, we cook this, but obviously if one's a Michelin star chef and the other one's a normal chef, there's a huge difference. And so it's all about I suppose proving how you work and what you can do, as opposed to just making the claim. Because as you say, like as a software company, you can't just make the claim and that's it and expect to be bought, expect them to be a purchase. You need to go and prove it and prove value and that sort of thing. So
very much so.
It makes total sense. And it's so much easier to do these days as well, because most people do have or most people should have video content of demos, of presentations, of involvement in webinars and that sort of thing. And that in itself is a lot more tangible than just your CV with a bunch of claims.
Yeah. Well, I once so I was working with a company that was going to try to make video contracts. So instead of signing a paper contract where you go in and you scroll down and you digitally sign at the bottom, there's reams of text. They were actually looking at making it into sort of 4 bold sections. This is who we are. This is what we expect. This is a video explaining, pointing at the different bits.
Yeah.
And down there is where you can sign, use that button. And you know what? We do similar. So when we send out a quote, we actually do a demo of walking through the quote. I think that people could do the same.
Yeah, I love it.
Take us through your CV yourself. Point out which bits were cool. Which bits are here, but you loved.
Yeah. I love that idea of the video contract. I know it's separate, but
it is amazing. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I believe it's great.
Well, you know what? Working with people like you in the industry and talking about these things, I really, really enjoy it. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to have come on today and chatted about things. I would like to say that if anyone has got a question and they'd like to reach out to me and find me on LinkedIn, Mark Green Consensus on LinkedIn, or mark.technology. You can find me there as well. Feel free to. Very happy to chat. And John and Isabella, what a pleasure to be on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mark, for everything.
Thanks, Mark. Catch
Cheers.
you soon.